So just a couple things. Today we are going through 3D Puff Digitizing. We are also going to talk about Applique. You guys can please keep your cameras turned off. We do not need the cameras on. I will just be sharing my screen with you, and you'll be able to see my screen. I recommend to just follow along, take some notes, and you can watch the recording after the session is over, and you'll find the recording in your customer portal. Okay, so if you can't hear, just make sure that your sound is turned all the way up and that you have the correct speaker chosen. And so let me know if you guys can still hear and see my screen. And you guys can also turn your cameras off. We don't need to see anyone for the webinars. Okay, so I have CHROMA Inspire open on my screen. I am going to use only Inspire today. If you have CHROMA Plus or CHROMA Luxe, then that's great. You can do all of the same things, and you actually have a couple of shortcuts with those higher tiers. So actually everything that you might be doing if you're using CHROMA Plus or Luxe is going to be a lot quicker, a lot easier. So those higher tiers are definitely great to upgrade to if you plan on doing all of your own digitizing. But I am going to just focus on CHROMA Inspire and show you guys how to digitize for 3D Puff. And I'm going to show you how easy it really is to convert something into a file that will work with foam. So when we're talking about 3D Puff or foam embroidery, that is just referring to a piece of foam that we're going to place under our stitches in order to give a raised 3D appearance. So when you are making a 3D puff hat, then you can really charge a lot more money for that. It has a higher perceived value, so it's a really great thing to know how to do, and it's super easy. You just need the correctly digitized file and some embroidery foam. So it is important that you use foam that is specific for embroidery. You can find this on Amazon, on allstitch.com, on Madeira.com, anywhere that you buy your threads, needles, you can find embroidery foam. So I'm going to start out with just looking at text. A lot of times we have names or logos that we want to make 3D puff. So if we just take a look at some lettering, whenever we are planning on doing a 3D puff design, we have to use a satin stitch. Foam cannot go underneath a run stitch. It cannot go underneath a complex fill stitch because those just, the run stitch of course is a single running line, and the complex fill will actually flatten out that entire piece of foam. So the two stitches that I have here in orange, those, or red, those will not work on foam. So we're only going to use satin. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now I have this text here, and I just used the text tool to create this lettering, and now I can actually convert this to work for foam. There are a couple of things that we are going to do or change, and I will list them on the screen. That way you guys can actually take a little note. Again, this whole webinar is recorded, and you'll find that recording by the end of the day in your customer portal, so you can always look for that. So we're going to change the underlay, the density, and then we also want to add something that is called end caps. So these are really our three main things that we want to look at or think about: underlay, density, end caps. So I'll talk about each one. The first thing is the underlay. So the underlay, if you aren't familiar, that is the stitch that first goes down to sort of combine the backing and the material together. It's just the first stitch that lays down before the top stitches are going to go over it. So if I were to take a look at my slow redraw to simulate how this will stitch out, you can see that right there, that zigzag and straight line, that is the underlay. So the underlay goes down first, then we have our satin stitch go over it. Now, the underlay here, what we want to avoid is we want to avoid the underlay from cutting that foam or flattening it out. So every time the needle punctures that foam, it's really going to start cutting it. And we don't want to have a lot of pieces of foam that are all chopped up. We also don't want to have that foam lose its puffiness because the underlay is sticking it down or tacking it down. So right now my text has a parallel underlay. The area that I'm going to find underlay is at the top right hand. These are all of my settings boxes. We can see we have the text box, we have the fill box, that's where you see density. We have the stitch length, that then we have the underlay tab. So we have many different types of underlay, and we're using different types of underlay for different materials. So for, say, a thicker, fluffier material, we might want to do a contour. On our complex fill, we have these lattice underlays. And you can see a little preview of what these are going to look like in that box. So most of the time, text has a parallel underlay. That is going to be a side-to-side stitch that runs parallel to the top stitches, so the same direction. We actually want to uncheck that, and what we want to do is choose a center line underlay. So now if I take a look at how this will stitch out, we have just that single line of stitch. That's going to help to just tack down our foam to our material, and then those top stitches will be good to go from there. Okay, so I changed it to a centered line. The other thing that I might want to change is length. So I mentioned that every time the needle punctures into the fabric, it's going to poke a hole. We really don't want that foam to be split in half before those top stitches lay down. So what we can do is we can actually increase the stitch length. So if I were to say increase this to 5 millimeters, then our needle isn't poking as many times into the material. So you can change the stitch length, the run stitch length. So usually there are two components to an underlay, but you can easily just change both, and everything else you can leave the same. So the center line underlay and the stitch length will be changed, and after you click apply, we're good to move on to the next part. So these are just general rules. The stitch length you could really set to whatever you would like, but the underlay, we do want that to be center line. Okay. The next thing that we want to change, and you guys can ask questions at any time, just send a chat. I do monitor that as we go along, so I'll see what your questions are and be sure to answer them. So we changed our underlay. Now I do want to change the density. The density is referring to how close these stitches are to each other. So if we zoom in quite a bit on this text here, then we can see that there is quite a bit of space. If I select this text, in my upper right hand corner of tools or settings boxes, the fill tab is where I see density. So right now my stitches are 1/2 of a millimeter from each other. If I stitched this out, I would see some gaps. So if we're doing just regular embroidery, most of the time we want to lower this. That way it'll thicken up and look like we have way less space. But when we're doing foam, we really want those stitches to be super close to each other so that we don't see any of that foam stick out. We almost want these stitches to be almost on top of each other so that they really fully cover that foam. So only when we're doing 3D puff embroidery would we really want to go at a lower density than say 0.3. There are some special cases where you might go 0.2, but you can see as I go lower and lower, these letters are really thickening up. 0.1 is very extreme, so I wouldn't quite recommend that all the time. I like to do 0.2. You can actually go to even a second decimal. So if you wanted to go a little bit in between, or say just a little bit less than 0.2, you could do that there. So it is common to see densities of 2 decimal points, 0.25, 0.35, or something irregular. So 0.2 is a really good starting point for that density. So just lower that down, and you can even see in the preview where it's blue, next to the box where I'm changing these numbers, you can see it actually gives you a preview of what that looks like. As you go to a higher number, the stitches are much farther apart. As you go to a lower number, they're very close together. So the density, we want that to be at a 0.2 or maybe less. I'm going to put a 0.2 as a density. So our stitches are really close together. Our underlay is just a single line that's just going to tack down that foam to our hat. And now we have end caps. So what are end caps? Well, we're going to take a look at these letters, at these individual letters, because these do require end caps. If we look at the bottom of the R, the stitches, they're running side to side. So every time that the needle pokes into that foam, it's going to cut it. So after our design stitches out, we can just rip away that foam and it will be nice and clean, and we just use maybe a little bit of heat, hair dryer, heat gun, and that foam will kind of shrink underneath those stitches. But at the bottom of the R, there aren't any needle points to cut that foam. So we're either A, going to have to try and cut it, say with like an X-Acto knife or box cutter, and then B, it won't be tucked underneath those stitches. So we'll see that foam pop out. And that's not going to look very high quality. So on the bottom of the R, on the top and the bottom of the I, on the ends of the C, all of these areas, we don't have any needle points to cut that foam. What we can do is there is a tool or a button that you can press on CHROMA and it will show you all of the needle points, all of the pokes. If you look at the very top, sort of middle of your screen, you have that 3D box, that's for a realistic view. You have a grid box that shows you your grid. And then you have stitch ends. So stitch ends, if I click that, I can see all of these little dots. So these are all the areas where the needle is going to poke. You can see in the middle of the letter, we have a couple stitch ends. That's because we have that underlay. There aren't too many, right? And on the edges of the letters, we have a lot of stitch ends. But on the caps, so the edges, we don't. So that's the reason why we want end caps. So let me show you how we're making these. We're using our satin stitch because we're always going to be on satin when we do 3D puff. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a shape where I'll have needle points at the bottom of this letter. So I'm going to zoom in quite a bit. So this is my shape that I'm going to make. And I'll change the color so that we can see what this is all about. What I did is I just created a shape that sort of looks, the insides kind of taper in, the bottom is straight across. And the reason why I'm tapering those ends inwards is because I don't want this to really stick out from the letter. But if you notice, so I just made two of them here. If you notice that when I place this down, if I even change it to the same color and push it backwards, you can see that at the bottom of this yellow letter, now I have a couple needle points. And so those are actually going to cut that foam and it's going to tuck it in underneath my top letter. So we wanted to tuck the letter or the foam, and we also wanted to cut the foam. We can make these in a variety of shapes, really. I could maybe just make a small rectangle, very tiny, just like that. But usually I like to just taper it inwards, and that way I can be sure it's really tucking it and cutting the foam. Okay, so what we have is just a little satin shape, and you can keep the density at about 0.5. If you were to lower it a little bit, you have a couple extra pokes on the bottom, but you can just create that one shape. And we want to make sure that these are going down first. So of course this is tucking in that foam before the top letter stitches out. So what I can do with these is I can duplicate them I can make as many as I might need. And there's a really easy way to duplicate in CHROMA. If you have one object, so this purple object, I have it selected, there's a duplicate key just about underneath where it says help in CHROMA. If you follow that down a little bit and hover, you'll see I have duplicate. And you can also activate this key by pressing Control D. So I'm going to click duplicate, and now I can just click. It could be anywhere, it doesn't have to be in the right spot. I can click for however many of these that I might need. And now it's just a matter of placing them. So this one here, I am going to put a little end cap just underneath this part of the R. You can place them like just right at the edge. This one I'm rotating it so that it tapers inward. So it's just right on the edge of the letter. And there are a couple jump stitches. We'll deal with those in just a moment. But all I did was I duplicated, and I'm just placing them where I need them. So if I look at the C, I'm going to just rotate that. You have an easy rotate. You can shrink them if your letters obviously are a little bit thinner in some areas. You can easily shrink them down. We don't want these to poke out. We just want them to cut the foam. Okay, so we have all of these purple end caps, and of course we don't want these big jump stitches, so we will trim those. And then of course we definitely want these to go behind the letter. So I can select all of these purple shapes. I'm going to just click on the item in my sequence panel. So I'm right down at the bottom right. And when we want to add a trim, we're going to add a command. So I selected all of the purple objects, and I'm going to my settings tabs to the command option, and we want the ending command to be to trim. And that has trimmed all of those objects. And now we can keep them all selected, and we can right click and we want to order them. So when we order something, we are telling the file that we want this to say go first or go last. So we want all of these to go all the way to the back. They're going to stitch first. So they're hidden by those top stitches. Okay. And then of course these over here, I didn't place them just yet, but you would place those, of course, underneath your letters, and just make sure that they're all fully tucked in, okay? So we did everything that we needed to do for this CHROMA text. Underlay, center line, change the stitch length, density, we set that down to 0.2, and end caps, we added those where necessary. Now, not everything needs end caps, and I'll show you a great example of something that doesn't need end caps, and it is a very curvy type of font. This purple RIC, there's also another font, that we can take a look at. So Bookman, Cooper, Kids, Impress, I believe, is one of them. So some of these, if we look at them, we might not need to add those end caps. So let's take a look at this one first. So all of the stitches, you can see, if I turn on stitch ends again, you can see that I have plenty of needle pokes in these letters. So there isn't anywhere that I'm going to have foam sticking out. So this font style, I would just need to change the density and the underlay. That's all that I would need to do. So after that, I'm done and I'm ready to put this over top of foam. The other font style here, this one, so again, what I did is I chose to turn on stitch ends. And so when we take a look at this font, we can really see that we do have quite a few needle pokes. You can see at the top of the eye and at the bottom. We might need like a smaller end cap in one area, but what you're looking at is you're just identifying where those needle points are, and if they really travel enough around the edges of the letter, then you don't need to add that. So on this font style, I would probably just keep it as is, and you can maybe do a little trim after if needed, but always run a test. You can just run a test on backing and see how it goes. So for example, these font styles, you probably don't need an end cap addition, especially on the one on the left in orange. We really don't need to add anything. So you're just changing number 1 and 2. Okay. So we looked at text, and you can really change any text to 3D Puff just by changing those 3 things. Let's say we want to actually make an object or some component of the design 3D. We have the same ability. It's perfectly fine. If I wanted to make a little heart, so I'm going to make a really small little heart. I'm going to, so right now it's just an artwork. I just use the artwork tool. You can make triangle, diamond, you know, anything. I can make a diamond as well. And whenever we use our artwork tool, we do need to use our auto digitizer to then convert it into a stitch format. These are just outlines, so if we look at the upper right, we're just going to change it into fill. So now they're filled in. Okay. So these are filled in. They're very tiny, and the reason why they're so tiny right now is because I want it to choose the satin stitch for these. So I can select both. Click on it. We do see that we have these little satin objects. Okay, so the reason why I made these so small, if they're large, okay, so now that it's satin, I can certainly make it bigger. Same for the diamond. So you're need those artworks, and I can make these just about as large as they will go. keep in mind a satin stitch where those stitches are now disappearing. It's because it's just too long of a stitch. The machine can't do that. It doesn't want to jump a whole inch and just have like a long floating stitch or a piece of thread. So keep them small. I can change it. So when you look at the heart, when I change that underlay, you can see it change there. So underlay, density, we still want it to be real dense. And then I can just look at the stitch ends again and I can see, do I need to add anything? I really don't on this, on the edge of the heart, like I really don't need to do any sort of addition. And with satin stitches, you can actually change the direction of the stitch. So if you've taken a beginner course or the shaping and editing, you will be familiar with this yellow line. And this yellow line is showing me the stitch directions. So at first I had it down the center. The stitches are running up and down. Now I changed it left to right, and you can see the stitches run left to right. So on a heart like this, you can either go a little slanted or up and down, and that will fill in everything really nicely. So up and down, I think, looks good. So the diamond, just same thing, so easy to do. You're just changing that underlay. You can change the stitch length as well, changing the fill and just lowering that. And then on the diamond, we do have little needle pokes on all edges, so this will stitch out just fine over top of foam. Okay. So any questions that you guys have, you can chat them in the chat box. And the last thing that I am going to cover is applique, because this is another different type of digitizing, and this is an option that we can certainly do with CHROMA. And we can do this with CHROMA Inspire, although it is going to be a longer process, a little bit more difficult with Inspire. So any questions on the 3D, definitely chat those now in that chat box. Otherwise, I will discuss applique. So when we're doing applique, let's say we have a patch. I'm going to mimic a patch, and let's just say we have this rectangular patch that we want to adhere to a garment, right? So this this brown patch here, this could be, you know, anything. It could be a piece of material, it could be an actual patch that we created, and we want to adhere it to a garment. So when you're hearing applique, just the process of stitching to another item. When you see a collegiate jacket with a letter, if you see a denim jacket with a big design on the back, but the design isn't embroidered direct on the jacket, that might be applique. So you can certainly look up plenty of videos on this whole process, what it looks like, but essentially the way that we're going to create an applique file is just by using 2 or 3 components. So the brown is my patch that I want to applique to another item. We first want to create for ourselves a placement stitch. So the placement stitch is going to go down onto my jacket so that I know where to place that patch. A placement stitch is just a run stitch. So when we create these artworks, just like I did with the heart and the diamond, we can auto digitize them. So if I pull it off to the side, you can see now I have just this run stitch in a rectangle. That is my placement stitch. That's how I know where to place that brown patch. So that will go down onto the material first, then I can place that patch. And then what I want to have happen next is most of the time you want a tack down stitch. The tack down stitch is going to be inset, meaning slightly smaller than your placement stitch so that it tacks down that brown patch. So if I just shrink this rectangle and auto digitize it, this purple run stitch now is my tack down stitch. And you can see that it's a little bit further in from the edge because that's going to adhere that patch to my garment. So far our applique file, we have a placement and a tack down. These are both going to be a run stitch. And the last component is going to be our satin stitch. So the final satin stitch is going to finish off the edges, and that's what really we're seeing on the garment, is just like a nice smooth satin stitch on the edges. So we can use our classic satin stitch tool. And when we create a satin, we always have to work in top to bottom or left to right. So just depending on where we need this to go. So with our satin, I'm going to just make this in a green. And we want this to really cover both the placement and the tack down. So if I make a little diagonal here, I can bring it out and then inwards, and I am holding onto shift when I want this line to be really straight. So if I hold onto shift, it's going to give me a nice straight line right down the middle. And then I can hold shift again, and that will give me another straight. So the process of making an applique file on CHROMA Inspire is a little bit lengthy. It's lengthier than if we had CHROMA Plus or Luxe, but we are able to do it. So I just wanted to give you guys the demo of how you're creating that file. So of course we can shrink, or we can lessen the density. And what we have now, if I just remove some of these shapes, this is how we're going to run this file. First, I have my placement stitch. You can set the machine to automatic manual. That means it will stop after each step. Now I place my patch down onto the material so that brown will go down. So placement stitch, then we have the brown go down, then we have the purple tack down. That's going to tack down that material, and finally our satin stitch to finish off those edges. Okay, so when we're doing applique, you're using run stitch and the satin, and of course this is a rectangle, so it's a lot easier. If we wanted to do something a little bit irregular, it would be definitely more difficult with CHROMA Inspire. With CHROMA Plus and Luxe, you have the ability to convert any stitch type into an applique form. So we could make this star, and with Plus or Luxe, I could right click and I could convert it, as that is an option in those higher tiers. All right, so if you guys have any questions, ask them now. We didn't really have any questions from the group today. Hopefully you guys can see just how easy it is to make 3D puff designs. You can do this with any text, any object. You just want to make sure that you're using the satin stitch, and that you have a large enough area for that foam to really pop. So you don't want to put 3D foam underneath a really tiny shape. It's probably just not going to look as great. So 3D puff is great addition to any embroidery. Most of the time you see it on a hat, or you can certainly do it on a jacket, but foam just doesn't wash well. So keep that in mind, that you're most likely not going to put foam on a t-shirt. So you will be able to view the recording in your customer portal. By the end of the day, you can log right back in and you'll be able to watch, and you can practice, make your own 3D puff design. Be sure to use embroidery specific foam.